Gears a little bit. You just heard an amazing tour of some of the best data on what we need to do to maintain our health, an end to illness. Now we're going to look inward and focus on how to motivate ourselves. Now we have a treat for you. Dr. Wayne Dyer has been called the father of motivation. What a wonderful name, the father of motivation. Dr. Dyer is one of the world's best speakers in the field of self-development, and he's with us here today to really give us some tips, some pearls on how each of us can overcome the obstacles that we face every day in self-motivation. You ready for a treat? Please help me in welcoming Dr. Wayne Dyer. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Wayne Dyer, and I'm 73 years old, and I have sex almost every day. Thank you. Almost on Monday, almost on Tuesday, almost. Last June the 26th, a year ago, June, I made an announcement to my family, to my children. I have 8 children, 6 daughters and 2 sons. They have been among my greatest teachers. Whenever I behave in any way that is inconsistent with something that I might have written or spoken about on television, they will remind me. I wonder what all those people would think of Mr. Positive if they could see him here this morning, was one of my daughter's favorite lines. My very favorite line was from my 13-year-old daughter many years ago. She's now 30. When she was sitting at breakfast, we had 5 children in 8 years, and they were all going to the same school, and I had to drive them. And she looked at her 11-year-old sister, Serena, and said, so if you didn't have any feet, would you wear shoes? And I looked around and thought, I wonder where this is going. What has she got? And Serena looked at her at 6 o'clock in the morning, which is not her favorite time, and said, what do you mean if I didn't have any feet, would I wear shoes? That's the dumbest thing you've ever said. Don't even talk to me. That's so ridiculous. And Summer said to her, don't get mad at me. I was just wondering why you're wearing that bra. That's, so I wrote it down, and I followed them around for my material. I say, come on, say something stupid. I really need something to. But on June the 26th of last year, I made an announcement to my family. I told them that I had written 41 books. Many of them I have been blessed to have appear on bestseller lists all around the world. And that I was not going to do that anymore. I had completed that part of my life, and I had some other things that I wanted to do, and I wanted to just sort of take it easy now. I'm 72 years old, and I don't want to have that that pressure to face those empty pages over and over and over again, as I've been doing since I was in my 30s. That was June the 26th. On June the 27th, I woke up and I began writing. And I wrote, excuse me, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote for the next 5 months. And I couldn't stop. because there is something inside of me that is a calling. There is something moving the pieces around that is bigger than who I am and what this ego of mine says. And it's getting in touch with that inner drive, that part of us that says, this is what you're here for. This is what you came into this world to be. I was being interviewed by the New York Times about a decade or so ago, and there was also a gentleman there who's a very famous writer. His name was Arthur Miller, perhaps the most famous American playwright of the 20th century. You've all read Death of a Salesman and The Crucible, and so many others. And Arthur Miller was 91 years old at the time, and he was asked the question, are you working on another play? And I'll never forget his answer, because it inspired me in many ways. He said, I don't know, but I probably am. But I probably am. That there is something that calls all of us here. And I just want to speak a little bit about that in the time that I have here this morning. There was, I have said that if there is, I wrote these words out last night. If there is intelligence behind life, and there is every reason to believe that there is, or that there may be, and think about that for a moment. If there's intelligence behind life, and all of science points to the fact that there is some kind of an intelligence behind life, behind this body that you were hearing about in the last hour, that there's something mystical, if you will. And I brought with me just a quote from the man who won the Nobel Prize for Physics. He was Einstein's greatest teacher. He was considered the father of modern quantum physics. His name was Max Planck. And on receiving the Nobel Prize for Physics, this is what he said. He said, as a man who has devoted his whole life to the most clear-headed science, to the study of matter, I can tell you, as the result of all of my research about atoms, this much, that there is no matter as such. That all matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particles of an atom to vibration and holds this minute solar system of the atom together. We must, as scientists, all assume that behind this force is the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. This divine intelligence that is behind everything that is working in this body that we are so consumed with and so concerned about, and how to keep it healthy, that there is something beyond that. One of my favorite poets once observed, he said, what if you slept? And what if in your sleep you dreamed? And what if in your dream you went to heaven and there picked a strange and wonderful flower? And what if when you awoke, you held that flower in your hand? Ah, what then? Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who wrote The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and I wonder when I ask that question, I've done it on a couple of my public television specials, to ask that question, do you really believe that such a thing is possible? Because as I wrote out last night, I said, if there is intelligence behind life, and there is every reason to believe that there is, then all of that intelligence must be innate in each creation of that intelligence. this universal mind, or this, whatever you want to call it, divine mind, the great Tao. I wrote a book 8 years ago called Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life, which was based on the ancient teachings of the Tao Te Ching by a man named Lao Tzu, who wrote it 2,500 years ago, 500 years before the birth of Christ. And in that great tome, some call it the wisest book ever written, there's 81 verses, and I decided to write an essay on each of those 81 verses and how to apply it in today's life. He said, the great Tao, God, soul, this matrix behind all of life, he said, it does nothing, and yet it leaves nothing undone. He said, each and every one of you are doing nothing. You're all just being done. There is something moving the checkers around in this checkerboard that we call our life, that Arthur Miller was referring to when he said, I don't know, but I probably am. And that I said, when I said to my children, I'm through writing books, not only have I written an entirely new book, which was 144,000 words that I couldn't stop writing. I wrote it all by hand, every word of it. It's why I'm sitting on this chair, because my neck went crazy. Sitting there, hour after hour, writing about all the significant quantum moments that have appeared in my life that turned the direction of my life from where it was headed into a right turn and sometimes into an about face. And I call this book, I Can See Clearly Now. I can see clearly that the things that were taking place when I really thought that I knew what I was doing, and something else was in charge of the whole process. One of the famous observations of one of our great humorists, Mark Twain, he said, the thing that gets you into trouble isn't what you don't know. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And there's so much of what we know for sure that just ain't so. Just like what I knew for sure that I wasn't going to be writing. Not only have I written another entire book and looked at all of these significant factors and features that were really at play, moving me about, but I've written another book on top of that I'm about 3/4 of the way through, based upon how to apply the Bhagavad Gita, the great song of the Lord that Gandhi based his life on, and how we can apply it each and every day of our life. So there's a wonderful poem I want to share with you that reflects what Mark Twain was saying, that it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. It's called The Cookie Thief. It was written by Valerie Cox. A woman was waiting at an airport one night with several long hours before her flight. She hunted for a book in the airport shops and bought a bag of cookies and found a place to drop. She was engrossed in her book, but happened to see that the man beside her, as bold as could be, grabbed a cookie or two from the bag between, which she tried to ignore to avoid a scene. So she munched the cookies and watched the clock as this gutsy cookie thief diminished her stock. She was getting more irritated as the minutes ticked by, thinking, if I wasn't so nice, I'd blacken his eye. With each cookie she took, he took one too. And when only one was left, she wondered what he'd do. And with a smile on his face and a nervous laugh, he took the last cookie and broke it in half. He offered her half as he ate the other. And she snatched it from him and thought, oh, brother, this guy has some nerve, and he's also rude. Why, he didn't even show any gratitude. She had never known when she had been so galled, and she sighed with relief when her flight was called. She gathered her belongings and headed to the gate, refusing to look back at the thieving ingrate. She boarded the plane, she sank in her seat, then she sought her book, which was almost complete. As she reached in her baggage, She gasped with surprise. There was her bag of cookies in front of her eyes. If mine are here, she moaned with despair, then the others were his, and he tried to share. Too late to apologize, she realized with grief that she was the rude one, the ingrate, the thief. Isn't that beautiful? Valerie Cox. As I went through the significant moments and the significant things in my life that have brought me to this place in my life, I realized that I've been in some kind of ascended master training since the time that I was born. That if every single one of us come from this divine intelligence, which all of the quantum physicists tell us do, that particles themselves do not create particles, that everything comes from energy. This great program, all done through Salesforce, who, with your CEO, who I'm sitting next to here this morning, this was an idea. This was a thought. Everything, William Blake said, everything that now exists was once a thought, which means that everything that is ever going to exist must also be a thought. And the greatest gift that we've been given is this great gift of our imagination. And if we can't put something into our imagination and be able to create it, then it isn't going to be able to become hardened into an objective reality, where now over 100,000 people sign up for such a conference as you're attending today. It all starts with an idea. I just watched the film Jobs the night before last in my hotel room. And I can really relate, even though I think he might have missed out a bit on the kindness factor, but I can relate to this notion that when you have a dharma, when you have something that you came here to do, when there's a calling that you have, when there's an excitement that takes place within you, and when you can't let go of that excitement, that's really God talking to you. That it's the invisible part of you, it's the soul that says, the soul of ours, this invisibleness that we carry around. I mean, we can all find the command center. All the brain surgeons can go in and they can look and they can say, this is the command center where this causes this thing to happen, this causes that thing to happen. If I say I'm going to wiggle my finger, and you say, well, and then I have a thought, and then that thought gets transferred and 1 trillion cells start working, and my finger wiggles from a thought. And we can find the command center, we can cut it off, and we can do things inside the brain. But no one has ever been able to find the commander in the command center that says, I think I'm going to wiggle my finger. I think I'm going to move my left foot. I think I'm going to write a book. I think I'm going to create something. That place of being aligned, Herman Melville, writing in Moby Dick. This really relates to me because I live on an island, as does Mark. I live on Maui. He lives on the Big Island. And I'll be there tomorrow morning in the ocean. Melville said this in Moby Dick: for as this appalling ocean surrounds the verdant land, so in the soul of man lies one insular Tahiti, full of peace and joy, but encompassed by all of the horrors of the half-lived life. The half-lived life. When I get to the time when I leave this body, I will never say that I lived the half-lived life. I understand what Steve Jobs was saying, when he would feel something so deeply inside and would be surrounded by people who couldn't share his vision, that there's something inside each and every one of us that drives us. And I was trained earliest to be a Jungian analyst by Carl Jung. And Carl Jung once observed, he said, he was talking about this idea that within each and every one of us there is this purpose. And he said, at the same moment that you are a protagonist in your own life and you're making choices, at the very same moment, you're also the spear carrier or the extra in a much larger drama. And he concluded that, and I've never forgotten this. He said, all of you are doomed to make choices. It sounds like such a paradox. If you're doomed, how can you be making a choice? So let me bring it into looking first at your own body. And you heard the doctor speaking before about your bodies, and so much of what he was saying I align with and relate to. Our bodies are what we are given to live out this incarnation, this time on this planet. I happen to be given a male body that's about 6'2", and it has hair that used to grow on its head and now grows in its ears, and all of these things. This is what I was doomed to. I mean, I'm not going to be in a female body. I'm not going to be in a body that has brown eyes when I have blue eyes, and so on. So in a sense, you are given this body. But you also have choices to make. And the choices that you make within this sense of being doomed, which is what he meant when he said you're a protagonist in your own life, but you're also a spear carrier in a much larger drama. That there is something bigger moving all of these pieces around. And this thing that is bigger, that is moving the pieces around, is something that you have to align with. And you can align with it in your body by treating it well, by feeding it the applause line, real food, by exercising, by watching how you relate to this body. You can make a huge difference, but you're still in this context of being doomed to make choices. Now look at the rest of your life. All of the things that brought you to this place, to this day right here in your life. And most of us have come into this into this place where we don't recognize this fundamental truth that within each and every one of us there is this this capacity that I have in one of my most recent books called Wishes Fulfilled. I call it the I am discourses. The word I am. See, if you want to be able to change something about yourself or to align yourself with this divine mission in which you say, yes, I have been doomed to do all of these things, but there are choices that I can make. So that, Rumi said that at the moment you are born, a ladder is placed before you to help you to escape from this world. So here's this ladder, this metaphorical ladder that is placed before us, and there are rungs on this ladder until you reach the top. The top of this ladder, I call it divine love. It's what T.S. Eliot spoke about. I use a lot of poetry because I write a lot of poetry and read a lot of poetry and believe that poets can speak to us in language that is very different than what scientists often speak. T.S. Eliot said that we shall not cease from exploration. But at the end of all of our exploring will be to return to the place from which we originated and to know it for the first time. Now, he was speaking about death, I believe. I'm not. I do not think that we have to leave our bodies in order to understand this divine intelligence from which we originated. I had a wonderful meeting back in the early 1970s late 1970s, with Buckminster Fuller, this great scientist, great man. We were speaking together at a conference in Denver, Colorado. And after the conference, he said, all of us are born geniuses, but life itself seems to de-genius us. We are all pieces of God. If we came from a divine intelligence, and all of that intelligence must be in all of its creations, then all of it must be in us, in each and every one of us. That all of us have these enormous capacities, these powers to be able to heal ourselves and to heal others, to manifest what it is that we want to place our attention on, to be able to create massive changes in our world, to bring peace to a place where there's so much violence and hatred. The Dalai Lama once said that if we could take every child on this planet at the age of 5 and teach them to meditate for 1 hour a week, we could eliminate all violence that exists on our planet in 1 generation. Imagine. 1 hour a week as a child, just thinking about compassion. We have so much violence in our world because we have violence in our heart. The violence that we have in our heart is because we have left our source of being, and we fill ourselves with rage and beliefs about who we are. But the truth is that most of us can't answer the simple question about who we are. I had a great teacher in India. His name was Nisargadatta Maharaj. My friend Deepak Chopra, who will be speaking here soon with me, introduced him to me. And I read his great work, I Am That. And he was asked the question, what is real? Master, what is real? And his response was, that is real, which never changes. Everything else is illusion. So, how does this apply to each and every one of us? What is there about you that has never changed? I have a picture of myself when I was 21 years old on the wall at home, and that was 50 years ago. There's not one cell of that body, that 21-year-old body, that's left here on this planet. It's all gone, every cell. And yet, I still persist. Here I am, in this body. And I sit here now in this 73-year-old body believing that this is me. But an hour from now, this body that I'm sitting in here will be a different body than the one I walked up onto the stage with. That everything in this physical domain is in a constant state of change, except for that invisible divine spark, the part of us that is real. And that part of us has a knowing about who we are and what we came here to be. Emily Dickinson, I just watched, Julie Harris just passed away about 2 months ago. And they announced that on TV, and I was watching, and she was 87 years old. And she portrayed Emily Dickinson in a film called The Belle of Amherst. She was from Amherst, Massachusetts, born in 1830. And so I ordered it. I had my children order this film for me, and they sent a copy of it to me. And it's a 2-act play. And it was Julie Harris just being Emily Dickinson, this recluse of a woman who wrote so much beautiful poetry. And She once said that, and when it was over, I watched the thing by myself in my writing space, in my sacred place. And as I watched it, I stood up when the audience stood up, and I gave her a standing ovation for as long as the audience could. I could not stop myself. It was so brilliant and so beautiful, something I encourage you to do. Julie Harris was just magnificent. I couldn't imagine being on stage and being so brilliant for such an extended period of time. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. This quiet dust, she would say, holding up a handful of dust, this quiet dust was gentlemen and ladies and lads and girls, was laughter and ability and sighing and frocks and curls. This passive place, a summer's nimble mansion where bloom and bees fulfilled their oriental circuit, then ceased like these. My beautiful mother passed away last July 22nd. And 2 days later, after she was cremated, she was 96 years old, they gave us an urn with her ashes in this urn. And I held this urn up, and I look at it and I say, surely this is not my mother. Not this handful of dust. Surely all of you are not what your ego has convinced you that you are. All of my accomplishments, all of my possessions, my reputation, how I'm regarded by others, all that I own, all that I've created, this great company, surely you're not these things, because they're not real. They're not real in the sense that they're always changing, just as your body is always changing. Surely that's not you. And coming into contact with who you are is the lesson that I learned in writing I Can See Clearly Now. I lived in an orphanage the first 10 years of my life. My father walked out on his family. My mother had 3 boys in 4 years by the time she was 22. And I was born in 1940, and my brothers were born in 1938 and 1936. My father just decided that he couldn't handle this. He was an alcoholic. He spent some time in prison. He was a thief. He was, by all accounts, the most evil of people. The kind of man that I did find difficult to have any love for, who would just walk away from his family responsibilities. My mother was able, when I was 10, by 1949, to remarry my father in another body, another alcoholic, abusive man that I lived with for 5 years. Because life gives exams, I guess, and if you don't pass them like algebra, you take it over until you get it. And that's what she did. And so I was reunited with my family. My middle brother, David, and I were together through all of the foster homes and all of the orphanages that we lived in, all of the random abuse and craziness that went on in those years. And we were finally reunited. And in the 4th grade at Arthur Elementary School on the east side of Detroit, I had a teacher. Her name was Mrs. Engels. And every day she would read to us. And she would read to us from 10 minutes to 3 until 3:15, provided that the class was good, meaning that they weren't noisy and rowdy and that we had to keep quiet in order to listen to her read this particular book that she read, which was a turning point in my life at the age of almost 10. It's why I know that there's something moving the pieces around in every single one of our lives. And what we have to do is we have to find our excitement and what it is that makes our soul feel good. And then stay with that, independent of what others might say. So I became the enforcer in the 4th grade at Arthur Elementary School, because when anybody would start to talk, I would walk over to them, or I would get them and tell them that they were not going to get to hear the story. And nobody really was that interested in hearing the story except me. I was just enthralled by this story. And the story was The Secret Garden. It was written in 1909. And it was the story of a little orphan girl, only I was a little orphan boy, who had just been reunited with his family, just met my oldest brother, didn't even know him before, my brother Jim. And I was finally living in a family and had a stepfather, but he was drunk every day. But what I learned in reading The Secret Garden, listening to The Secret Garden, is that there is a secret garden inside each and every one of us, and that door opens inward. And there is a place within each and every one of us where we can see God at work. We can see God within ourselves. We can know that we are pieces of God. We are sparks of God. We must be like what we came from. We came from this intelligence that Max Planck spoke about, the matrix of all matter. And all of its creations must contain all of its intelligence, so that it's in all of us. The ability to have that secret place, that inner Tahiti, full of peace and joy. There was a little boy in that book named Dickon who always looked at the positive side of everything. He could just never talk about death, and he would never talk about sickness, and he'd never talk about what was wrong, because he said, what you talk about, you become. What you think about becomes your reality. I was 10 years old. It's almost as if I had to have a conversation with God before I got here. And because I told Serena, my daughter, many times, if you don't like the way I'm parenting, because she would always give me little lectures about how I was doing it wrong as she was growing up as a teenager. And I'd say, if you don't like the kind of father that I am, then you should be very careful and recognize that it isn't my fault. I'm just doing what I know how to do, and you picked me to be your father, and if you didn't like the kind of father that I am, you shouldn't have picked me, you should have picked someone else. And she looked at me and said, you mean to tell me that I picked you before I came in? I said, exactly. It's an infinite universe, and you had to get here, and you needed someone, and I was the one you needed, and Mom was the one you needed, and so you're telling me that I chose you? I actually chose you? I said, yes, you did. And you should be very careful when you make decisions like that. And her great line to me was, I must have been in a hurry. And I feel that as if I had a conversation with God before I came into this world, and God said to me, what is it that you would like to do while you're here this time around? And I said, I'd like to teach self-reliance. That's all I've done since I've been here. I've written 41 books on this subject of relying upon yourself and trusting in yourself and going within. As my evolution has taken place, my writing has taken place. I've written from my heart all these years. And God said, then we better get your little ass into an orphanage. Because when you're in there, you will learn to rely upon yourself, because there's not going to be anybody else there to do it for you. And I look at the first 10 years of my life and taking care of my brother David, who was 16 months older, much smaller. He was very sickly. And I had to struggle to help him and to keep bullies away from him and so on. I can look at those 10 years of my life as the early training ground. My stepfather was a Roman Catholic, And on Tuesday nights in 1953, when I was 13 years of age, there was a very famous comedian, American comedian. His name was Milton Berle, and they had the Milton Berle Show, sponsored by Texaco. Uncle Milty, some of you may remember. But opposite the Milton Berle Show on Tuesday nights was another show. There were only 3 channels in those days. We had a little black and white Admiral television set. We'd sit around and look at this. And there was this man who would lecture on Tuesday nights opposite Milton Berle. His name was Bishop Fulton Sheen. And my uncle, my stepfather, Bill Drury, loved to watch Bishop Sheen. And I used to come, and I was 13 years of age, and I would watch Milton Berle only on the commercials, because Bishop Sheen fascinated me so much that I would actually bring a notepad, and I was taking notes on what he would say. And the name of his show, does anybody remember the name of his show back in 1953? It was called Life is Worth Living. In the 41 books that I've written, the subtitle on every one of them could have been, Life is Worth Living. There is something deep within each and every one of us that allows us to know that life is worth living and that we can make a difference in this world. And whatever it is that creates that excitement within us is really our connection to God. When Muktananda, the great Indian saint, would have people come to his ashram, and as they would enter the ashram, he would ask them the question, do you know the difference between good and God? And if people would say no, they didn't know, he would take his hand and he would go like this and make a little zero. And he'd say there's zero difference between good and God. So whatever it is that makes you feel good is really God. If it's your soul that makes you feel good, and if it doesn't inhibit anybody else from being able to feel good, then that's your dharma. And you have to go with your excitement. I suspect that this company wouldn't exist if there wasn't somebody that had an idea inside of them that made them feel good about how can we help to transform people's businesses so that they can live more successful and happy lives. But the greatest success definition that I've ever heard happened when I was being suspended from high school for speaking up about some things that they didn't take nicely to in high school. I had to fill out some forms about my father's name, my mother's name, and it was always very confusing. I never knew what to do with that, so I just wrote, "That's my business." And instead of them asking me why I would take such a stance, they sent me to the office, and I had to sit on the bench and wait for Mr. Wolf, the principal, to pass his judgment, and then he would make my mother come. And while I was sitting there waiting 3 days, they had a little book there written by Henry David Thoreau called Walden Pond. But at the back of that book was an essay on the necessity of civil disobedience. And I figured if they put that book there, that must be there for a reason. They must want people like me to read it. And so when I had my meeting with Mr. Wolf, and my mother had to come from work and take 3 buses to get there, and I explained why I had said what I said, and that we have to stand up against these silly things. And this wasn't the first time I was there in that office. But Thoreau said this in that essay on the necessity of civil disobedience. That is, when things are out there that you don't agree with, that you have to go within and find something inside of you that says you have to stand up for it. I know, because when my own mother was born in 1916, women couldn't even vote in the United States until she was 4 years of age. And that didn't happen because people obeyed the rules. That happened because people took the role of civil disobedience and said, there's something inside me that says this is wrong, and I'm willing to fight for it. Tomorrow is the anniversary of a day that changed my life forever. Except November the 22nd, 1963. I was a marcher during the Civil Rights days. I was in the United States Navy when it was segregated. I walked into a coffee shop in Havre de Grace, Maryland, with my friend Ray Dudley from Chicago, who was African American, and they refused to serve either one of us because he was black and in the uniform of the United States Navy. That wasn't very long ago. I was outraged and horrified by such conduct. And the man who said, we're going to change that, put hope in my heart. And the day that he died, I was at Wayne State University in Detroit, driving up Crane Street. It's on my Facebook page today. I wrote a whole thing about it. It's a chapter, and I can see clearly now, because I decided that I wanted to be someone who could make a difference in this world, who could end that kind of hatred and horror shows that was so present back there in the 60s and 70s. The United States Navy was segregated when I was in it, and it was an outrage to my soul. And I just like to say a little prayer, I guess, for the 50th anniversary of this man who made me believe that one person can make a difference. He put hope in my heart and in my soul. And Thoreau's definition of success was this. He said, if you advance confidently in the direction of your own dreams and endeavor to live the life which you have imagined, you will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. That's what my life has been about. It's been dedicated to this idea of advancing confidently in the direction of my own dreams and endeavoring to live this life which I have imagined. And the key word there is dreamed and imagined. Your imagination is your greatest gift. Anything that you can place into your imagination can harden into a reality if you follow very specific principles. I outlined them in detail in Wishes Fulfilled. If you begin to assume the feeling of a wish fulfilled, if you begin to know within your heart that what it is that you came here to be and came here to do. I was so blessed as a young doctoral student to have as a mentor a man many of you read when you were in college. His name was Abraham Maslow. He's most famous for his hierarchy of needs. At the top of this pyramid, he said, there is something inherent in each and every one of us. The base is just our needs to take care of our bodies, to feed them well, to give them enough rest, to do all of these kinds of things. And then our needs to belong, and our needs to fit in, and our needs to be loved. These are all part of this hierarchy of who we are as human beings. But at the very top is this apex, this little corner of the pyramid. It's called self-actualization. To actualize your life in the way that you came here to actualize it. And Maslow said that there are certain people who come into this world who live from a self-actualized perspective. And there's certain things about them, there's certain qualities that they possess. There's a certain way that they go about their life. and that they're very seldom understood. I thought about that a lot the other night as I was watching Jobs. I think about it as I was sitting next to your CEO, Mark. And I think about it in terms of my own life. Because so many people are willing to come into your life and tell you what your Dharma ought to be. That you should be doing this. That you should live that way. That when you place your thoughts on what other people want for you, or when you put your thoughts so much on what you don't want, or what's missing, or what you can't have. And self-actualized people don't think like that. The day that I became acquainted with Dr. Abraham Maslow was because the principal in the school where I was the school counselor got the flu. And she changed the whole course of my life that day when she got the flu. Because she got the flu and was sick, I had to address the entire parents group of the school that I was teaching at in Michigan, Mercy High School. And that, the day after Labor Day, in 1966, I addressed the students and their parents on what I had a vision for what the school year was going to look like. I was 26 years old. I had just received my master's degree and was ready to peruse all of the different ways of studying for a doctoral degree. I was going to study Jungian analysis. I was going to study Skinnerian approach to psychology. I had all of these ideas on what I wanted to do. And a girl named Nancy Armstrong walked into my office. Now, these are quantum moments. Maslow called them peak experiences. She walked into my office, and I look back at this as I wrote I Can See Clearly Now, and I think about this so profoundly. It was like she handed me a book. It was a compendium of great contributors, Yeats and Freud, and I mean every scholastic area of inquiry was in there. There was about maybe 80 or 90 essays in there. And she said, "My mom heard you speak last night, and she was so taken by what you said that she got this book because she's a member of something called the Book of the Month Club. And the Book of the Month Club gives a bonus to people for buying so many books, and they gave her this, and she's never going to read it, but she thought because of what you said last night, you would like it." And I read this collection of writings, and I looked at it, and I thought, this is interesting. And that afternoon, I was to go down and file my plan of work for my PhD program. And rather than drive down and face the traffic going into downtown Detroit, I was at the University of Michigan and Wayne State University. I sat and read an essay called The Whole Man by Abraham Maslow. And Maslow was the first person that I'd ever seen in the field of psychology who spoke about we should not be assessing who human beings are and what they're capable of doing based upon what's missing or what's wrong or what they can't do or their weaknesses. We shouldn't study neurology, neurological disorders. We shouldn't study how psychotic people are or how neurotic they are. We should look at the greatest achievers who've ever walked among us, know that they all came from the same intelligence, and recognize and help people to find that within themselves. And as I read this essay, I was so taken by it, and he talked about the qualities or the characteristics of what he called self-actualizing people. And he said the number one quality and characteristic of these people who live at the apex of what he called self-actualization, who are way beyond just taking care of their biological needs, who are way beyond their social needs, who are way beyond needing to be loved and so on. These are people who came here with a purpose. These are people who have a dharma. These are people who won't let anyone else determine what it is they're going to be. He said the number one quality of these people is that they are independent of the good opinion of other people. They listen to an inner voice that only they can hear. They have a soul inside of them. Their soul, I wrote this out the other night about the soul. The ideal of the soul, this inner part of you that says, I think I'm going to, the commander in the command center that's in each and every one of you that is processing the words that are coming out of my mouth, not this body that's sitting there. It's going to change, and it's going to be something different. Every minute, it's going to change and be something different. I'm talking to your soul. I'm talking to the invisibleness within you. The ideal of the soul, the thing that it aims for, is neither knowledge, nor light, nor happiness. The ideal of the soul, the ideal of your innerness, who you are, not this body you're in, but who you are, the observer to that body, is space. It's immensity. Why? Because it's infinite. And why is it infinite? Because it's not finite. It's either finite or it's infinite. Finite means it begins someplace and it stops someplace. Where do your thoughts stop? Where does your soul stop? It doesn't. So therefore, anything that's inside of you that is infinite has got to expand. It has to expand. It needs to keep growing. And anytime you try to put it into a box or compartmentalize it or tell it what it ought to be, you know, all of you, I don't know all of you who are parents, but you've all heard your kids at one time or another say, "You're not the boss of me. You can't tell me what to do." You've all heard this, right? You all said it yourselves. When I was a kid, I was called a scurvy elephant, because when I came home from school, I asked Mrs. Scarf, the lady that I was living with at the time, "What's a scurvy elephant?" She said, "Where did you hear that?" She said, I heard Mrs. Poole telling the principal that Wayne Dyer is in her classroom and that he's a scurvy elephant." She got on the phone, she called the principal, she said, "That's Wayne, he never gets anything right, he gets everything mixed up." She didn't say he was a scurvy elephant in her classroom, she said he was a disturbing element in her classroom. Your soul is a scurvy elephant. That inner part of you that wants to expand, it has a theme song. Ready? It was sung by Bing Crosby. It was sung by Roy Rogers. "Oh, give me land, lots of land, and the starry skies above. Oh, let me ride through the wide open spaces that I love. Don't fence me in. Don't put a fence around me. Don't put me into a box. Don't tell me how my life ought to be. I came here with a purpose. I came here with something that I have to do." That's your soul speaking. And a person like Steve Jobs doesn't take kindly to it. The ladder that I spoke about that Rumi placed before us at the beginning of our lives to help us to escape from this world helps us to deal with this whole idea that we are doomed to make choices. Yes, our physical body is what it is, but we can make choices about it. Yes, our spiritual body, our purpose, our dharma, what we're here for, it's also doomed, but we make choices. What are the choices? You came here to be a great artist. I did a whole film on this. It's called The Shift. And this whole idea is that you came here to be a great artist. Do you pick up a paintbrush? Do you do what Van Gogh did? You just go out there and paint because it's in your soul? Because the second characteristic of self-actualizing people, according to Maslow, is that they are detached from outcome. They don't do what they do because of what result is going to come to them, because of how much money they're going to make, how much prestige they're going to get, how big their business is going to grow. That is not what motivates self-actualized people. What motivates self-actualizing people is, this is my calling. I found myself reading the Bhagavad Gita for the third time in the last 3 months. I just keep reading it over and over, just like when I did the Tao 8 years ago when I turned 65 and couldn't stop it. And the teachers showed up. The Buddhist proverb is that when the student is ready, the teachers will appear. It's not whether there's teachers there, there's teachers everywhere. Everything is a teaching. The question isn't whether the teachers are there, the question is, how willing are you to pay attention? How willing are you to listen to that inner voice that no one else can hear? That little scurvy elephant in there that says, "You're not the boss of me. You can't tell me what I'm here for." You have to, It takes a kind of fearlessness, because fear is such an omnipresent force in our lives. You hear the doctor talking about cancer, so much of it. I just had a person on my last public television special named Anita Moorjani, who wrote a book called Dying to Be Me. An amazing book, an amazing woman who had end-stage cancer. She was down to 82 pounds. No one who had ever had that level of cancer had ever even survived. She had hours to live. They were whispering in her ear. She was flatlined practically. And she, from the other realm, from the other vision, was told by her father, who had passed 10 years before, you can go back. You have something to teach. And she didn't want to. Now remember what Mark Twain said, and remember the cookie thief. It's not what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. My philosophy has always been, have a mind that's open to everything and attached to nothing. Open to everything. All things are possible. Jesus said it so beautifully in the New Testament. I don't have to say it. With God, with your highest self, with this place of divine love, all things are possible. And when you have this knowing within, this is what I'm here for. This is the song I came here to play. Independence of the good opinion of other people, detachment from outcome. I do what I do because of the passion I feel. I am not here because of what you paid me to be here for. I am not here because of any need that I have to sell another book. I am not here for anything external to myself. I am here because I have a passion within me, the same passion that I felt 50 years ago tomorrow when the President of the United States, the man that I believed could change what happened to Ray Dudley and myself in Havre de Grace, Maryland, back there in 1961. That we can, when we get something into our hearts, a different kind of love. The great Peter Dunov, a great Bulgarian scholar and spiritual master, who Albert Einstein said of Peter Dunov, he said, the whole world bows before me. And I bow before Peter Dunov. Peter Dunov, in 1944, the year that he died, when the country of Bulgaria was overrun by the Nazis, was the person responsible for not one Jew being sent to the concentration camps, because he contacted the Tsar and was able to keep them from sending the people that were on the trains. It was a spiritual knowing. This man wrote over 250 books on something called divine love. A kind of love that I aspire to. A kind of love that is beyond the ego. The ego is this part of us that has edged God out, E-G-O. It's edged God out. Rabindranath Tagore, the great Indian poet, said, speaking of the ego, I went out alone on my way to my tryst. But who is this me in the dark? I step aside to avoid his presence, but I escape him not. He makes the dust rise from the earth with his swagger. He adds his loud voice to every word I utter. He is my own little self, my Lord. He knows no shame, but I am ashamed to come to thy door in his company. That's the ego. That's the part of you that says who I am is what I have and what I do and what I've accomplished and what other people think of me and how much I own. And all of those external things. Maslow said that self-actualizing people do not even see appearances. They see the unfolding of God in everything and everyone they encounter. Much like Mother Teresa, whose presence I was graced to be in 1989. She said, when she was asked the question on KTAR radio in Phoenix by Pat McMahon, my dear friend, is there anything I can do for you, Mother Teresa, to help you with the work that you have come here to do? And she said, no. I just came here to support the homeless shelter that was built here in Phoenix, where I stayed last night. He said, but Mother Teresa, I could raise money. This is a 50,000 watt clear channel station. We go all over the United States. Could I just do anything for your ashram in Calcutta? And she said, no, Pat. She said, stand up. She was about 4'10" herself. He said, Mother Teresa, we could raise money. She said, I'm not interested in raising money. I'm here to support the homeless shelter. He said, isn't there anything that I can do? And she said, there is one thing that you can do for me. She said, tomorrow morning, get up at 4 a.m. and walk out onto the streets of Phoenix and find someone who's living there who believes that he's alone. And you convince him that he's not. It makes me cry. She said, every day I see Jesus Christ in all of his distressing disguises. This is what Peter Dunoff talked about with something called divine love. He said there are three kinds of love. There's human love, and human love is a love that changes, and it's a love that varies. And we all know that kind of love. I love you, but you forgot my birthday, not so much. I love you so much last night, but today you didn't brush your teeth, you don't smell so good. Whatever, I love you. It changes and it varies. And then he said there's what he called a spiritual love. And a spiritual love is a love that never changes, but it varies. It's the love I have for all 8 of my children and for all of humanity now as well. I try to. It's my aspiration. No matter what they do or how they may disappoint you or whatever things that they may have done that you find anathema or difficult to handle, you still love them. You still love them. It's a love that never changes. Even the parents of the people who commit these heinous crimes, they still have love for their children. It varies. Yes, it varies. It varies even with our own children, but it never changes. But then there's a love that he called divine love. And divine love is a love that never changes and it never varies. It's the love that your source of being has for you, that invisible intelligence, God, source, divine mind, Tao, Krishna, Allah, Buddha, call it what you want. The opening line of the Tao says, the Tao that can be named is not the Tao. This is the kind of love that I aspire to teach, where nothing but love comes out. The telling moment of my life occurred on the 30th of August, 1974, when I went to my father's grave after finding out he had been dead for 10 years. And I went there with a different intention on what I was going to do on his grave. I was so filled with rage and anger and hatred toward this man. But rather than do what I had gone there to do, some invisible, divine, organizing intelligence that moves the planets and grows your fingernails and beats your heart, that commander in the command center to which you are always connected, your I am presence, if you will, called me back to his grave after I cursed him for 2 hours on that Friday afternoon. And I stood there and I said, from this moment on, I send you love. Who am I? Who am I to judge you? You did what you knew how to do. given the conditions of your life. And when I left that gravesite, I was a completely changed man. Alcohol hasn't touched my lips since that day. I walked away from it. I got myself into the best shape of my life. I began running, and relationships began to change. The right people, the right woman came into my life. My children began to appear. Because when you advance confidently in the direction of your own dreams and endeavor to live the life which you have imagined, you will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. Everything about my life changed. My writing took on a whole different flavor. Before, I was stuck. I checked into a motel room, the Spindrift Motel in A1A in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and I wrote a book that today has over 100 million copies in print in 47 languages, called Your Erroneous Zones. It came because the rage was gone. Mark Twain once said that forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. That's divine love. It's the love that Hafiz spoke about. Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, "You owe me." Just think what a love like that can do. It lights up the whole world. If we can get the hatred out. I brought a poem. I just did a new public television special. And I closed it with this. We built a treehouse. It'll be airing beginning in June. And I speak about divine love, and I do a seminar every year in Maui. You're welcome to come. Well, you're almost welcome. It's almost sold out. But I do it with, this year I'm doing it with Anita Moorjani, myself, and Immaculée Ilibagiza, the brilliant Rwandan woman who survived the Holocaust of 1994 through her faith in God. Saints that I'm going to be presenting divine love 2 days in January. But this is one of the favorite poems. It gives me what my kids often call the tinglies. That goose flunch. Goose? Did I say goose? It's like goose, only it's goose. Goose flesh. It's called In a Treehouse by Hafiz. And we built this beautiful treehouse, and it's you'll love it. You'll see it on PBS. Light, said Hafiz, will someday split you open even if your life is now a cage. For a divine seed, the crown of destiny is hidden and sown on an ancient fertile plain that you hold the title to. This is where you came from. This is what I spoke about with T.S. Eliot when I first came out. This whole idea that there is an intelligence that you will come to know. Listen, for a divine seed, the crown of destiny is a hidden and sown on an ancient fertile plain that you hold the title to. This is your destiny. Love will surely bust you wide open into an unfettered, blooming new galaxy. Even if your mind is now a spoiled mule, a life-giving radiance will come. The friend's gratuity will come. Oh, look again within yourself, for I know you were once the elegant host to all the marvels in creation. From a sacred crevice in your body, a bow rises each night and shoots your soul into God. Behold the beautiful, drunk, singing one from the lunar vantage point of love. He is conducting the affairs of the whole universe while throwing wild parties in a treehouse, on a limb, in your heart. Hafiz. Poetry, so beautiful. When you take that last breath, your body My dear friend Ram Dass, that Mark was speaking to me about before, who lives with me on Maui, when he celebrated his 80th birthday, we were all asked to just say something special to him, and he's one of my dearest and closest friends who wrote Be Here Now and was instrumental in one of those turning points that I wrote about, and I can see clearly now. And I gave him a line from William Butler Yeats, the great Irish poet. I said, Ram Dass, this is what Yeats said about an old man. He said, an aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, unless soul claps its hands and sings and louder sings for every tatter in its mortal dress. We're all just tattered coats on a stick unless we find our soul, that part of us that doesn't want to be fenced in. The great Patanjali, 2,300 years ago, when you are inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, all of your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction. And you find yourself in a new and a great and a wonderful world. And then he said, dormant forces, that is, forces that you thought were dead and inaccessible to you, dormant forces, faculties and talents come alive. And you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. You discover yourself to be God, to be a piece of God, that intelligence that is in all of its creations. Said Rumi, you who seek God apart, that which you seek, thou art. If you want to seek the beloved's face, polish the mirror and gaze into that space. Because in every moment of your life, ladies and gentlemen, I promise you, you have this choice. You can either be a host to God or a hostage to your ego. It's your call. Thank you, and God bless you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Wayne. I don't even know where to start. I'm worried I'm the stubborn mule of your last poem. So this session is all about all of these folks whose lives are filled with hectic everything, thinking about their personal health. How do you define personal health?
The question is just whether or not you're aligned with your source of being. We all have one free will, and our free will is the choice to be connected to that from which we originated or disconnect from it. And the way to stay disconnected to it is not to identify with your body and its health. It came into this world at the moment it was supposed to, and it will leave, and you have choices. Melville said that God's one and only voice is silence. And Blaise Pascal, the great scientist and philosopher, said that all of man's troubles stem from his inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Learn to connect to God, whose one and only voice is silence. I do it every morning for 2 hours, and it's how I live. you'll find peace there. That's your inner Tahiti.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Wayne Dyer. Thank you so much.
Thank you.